In today's lesson, we are going to look at what happens after the fertilization of the egg and how the offspring, or the embryo, as it is known at this point, develops. And we're going to look specifically at three different ways that the embryo can develop in different types of animals. So our key sentence here is that the growing offspring, or the embryo, may develop outside or inside of the parent's body. And we are going to start by looking at egg-laying animals. So in egg-laying animals, the offspring develop inside an egg that's laid outside of the parent's body. So most animals that don't have backbones, like worms and insects, lay eggs. Lots of different fish, reptile, birds also lay eggs. So this is, you're the most familiar with this probably with like a chicken egg, how chickens hatch from an egg. Also, turtles that we see at the bottom here is another example. The contents of that egg provides all the nutrients that the developed embryo needs. It's called an amniotic egg. So amniotic eggs are covered with membranes and a leathery shell while still inside the parent's body. So like even a chicken egg is kind of leathery until it's laid, and then it sort of hardens up and becomes what we typically know of as sort of a hard egg shell. So I want to look at all the different features. I know on the surface it looks like it's kind of a simple structure, but it's rather complex actually. So let's go down here and look at the different parts. So let's first look at, if I outline this section here, would represent the embryo. So that's the embryo. That is the developing offspring that is inside of the egg. We can see that that embryo gets its nutrients from this section here. And we call this the yolk. So the yolk is the food supply for the embryo. Just like with regular organisms, if it is relying on a food supply, there's also going to be wastes that are produced. Those wastes then have a special membrane here in which they fill in, and they collect in that membrane. There is another membrane that we see here represented sort of in this blue section, and that membrane is where oxygen and carbon dioxide can move across the membrane. So oxygen can get into and carbon dioxide can leave. And then the shell of the egg is what gives protection and keeps the moisture in, and it allows for the exchange of gases. So that obviously is the shell that is out here on the outer side. So you can see that there are several parts to the structure of an amniotic egg. You have the hard shell on the outside that gives it its protection and keeps the moisture in. You have a more flexible membrane just inside of that allows the oxygen and the carbon dioxide to move across the membrane to get into the embryo. You have the yolk that is the food supply that helps get the nutrients to the embryo as it develops and grows. You have a separate membrane where all of the waste is gathered as the embryo develops, and then you have the embryo itself. So obviously as the embryo develops, it gets larger and the food supply gets smaller, and eventually you see like the turtle down here at the bottom that emerges when it is ready to be able to live on its own. Similar to that, we also have some organisms that are called egg-retaining animals. egg-retaining animals. So in these animals, the embryo develops inside an egg, but that egg is kept inside of the parent's body. So just like with the egg that is left or laid outside of the body, the embryo gets all of its nutrients from the egg's yolk. The young, they do not receive any extra nutrients from the parents. It's just that instead of laying the egg outside, like in a nest, it keeps the egg inside of its body. And then that egg will hatch either just before or just after it is released. So some fishes, some amphibians, some reptiles use this type of way to reproduce. So the egg is kept inside of the body until it is ready to hatch. Lastly, we're going to look at placental mammals. We, as humans, are placental mammals. Dogs, horses, those types of animals are called placental animals. So what happens is that the embryo develops inside the mother's body. So it's not developing within inside an egg, it's just inside the mother's body. And it is the mother's body that provides the embryo with everything that it needs during its development. These materials are exchanged between the embryo and the mother through what's called the placenta. So the placenta is an organ in which the materials are exchanged between the embryo and the mother. What happens is that the blood that carries the food and the oxygen from the mother flows into the placenta, and then that oxygen and the food, if you will, is sort of transferred through the placenta into the bloodstream for the embryo. And then the blood that is carrying the wastes and the carbon dioxide from the embryo flows into the placenta and then transfers through the placenta into the mother's bloodstream. So it's real important here to make sure that we understand that the mother's blood does not mix with the embryo's blood. And a lot of times I think that people have that misconception. They think that the mother's blood is flowing through her body, flows into the embryo, and then back out. But that's not the case. So if we, sort of look at this diagram over here, which is kind of blown up a little bit too much to kind of show us, but we have the embryo here that is developing inside of the mother. So notice it's not in an egg, it's inside the mother. We can see that these blood vessels here are attached to the placenta. So here would be the placenta, and then over on the other side, out over here, would be the mother's body. So the placenta is sort of this intermediate organ between the mother's body and the embryo. So what happens then is that the nutrients and the oxygen will flow from the mother, get into the placenta, and then diffuse into the bloodstream for the embryo. Likewise, any wastes that are produced by the embryo will then flow into the placenta and then pass back through the mother so that she can get rid of the waste products. So as we can see here, there are sort of three different ways that embryos develop. We have those animals that will lay eggs outside of the body, and then the embryo develops within that amniotic egg and then hatches. Similarly, we have the egg-retaining animals in which the offspring develop fully within the egg using its nutrients, but the egg is kept or retained inside of the animal. And then we have placental mammals where there's no egg that the embryo develops. It actually develops inside the mother's body, and there is exchange of nutrients and wastes through this specialized organ called the placenta. Alrighty, see you next time.